Insightful and thoughtful communication can bridge the gap of understanding with each other, our trials, our victories, and the world around us, especially during difficult times. Valuable wisdom and life lessons can be garnered from almost every conversation that we are privileged to have. I am honored to be able to have these thought provoking conversations with everyday people from our community. I'm Cory George. Dominique Vaughn and poet, author, domestic violence, and child sex abuse advocate Sistah Fran join me today in a conversation that proves that you get to decide how long your painful past will negatively affect your future. They both found the strength and resilience to rise above adversity and live as positive and purposeful life as possible. Dominic spent most of his young life in the foster care system as a result of his mother's drug addiction. He shares how his experiences in foster care helped shape his image of what it was to be a man, husband, and survivor. He also shares how finding God at an early age positively influenced his life and paved the way for forgiveness and freedom. Sistah Fran shares her painful experience with childhood sex abuse and later on domestic violence and how she finally found the courage to save her life and positively change the direction of her future. And so thank you guys so much for sitting down with me today to talk about the transformation of your trauma into your triumph. And what I mean by that is you guys have dealt with some things that, for all accounts, some people would not survive, but yet you chose a light on the other side. And so we're going to talk about those things you've gone through and all the choices that were involved in you becoming this version of yourself now. So I'm going to start with you, Fran. I know that your childhood was riddled with some things that any child should not have to go through. So can you talk a bit about that, please?
Yes, I am a survivor of childhood sexual, physical, and verbal abuse. Unfortunately, the perpetrator was my biological father. And unfortunately, my mother did nothing to protect me, and she is still married to him. As a result of the abuse, I now suffer from depression and anxiety disorders.
And so with it being so close to the home and so close in the family, what kind of effect did that have on you in terms of how you saw your family structure?
It was just dysfunctional, chaotic. It was just cycles of abuse.
So with me being a victim of childhood sexual assault from an early age and knowing the family structure I had, one of the things that I deal with and talk about often is how in the Black family structure, we have this thing whereas we don't take things outside of the home. And in my opinion, and I want to see if you have the same feeling, that silencing the victim is almost like it's as if it's a re-victimization.
Yeah.
Meaning this person who is doing whatever is scot-free and living while we're dealing with the torment and it's showing up in every facet of our lives, right?
Yes.
So do you feel that was part of the issue, whereas nobody wanted to talk to it and it was taboo?
Yeah, it was very taboo. I think that if my mother would have stepped in when it first happened to my sister, it would have never happened to me. So I think that was like one of the things that I've had a really hard time with, that it didn't have to happen.
So what is your relationship like now with your mother and or father?
I don't have a relationship with neither. I've cut my father off. But my mother, I had that yearn to want to have a relationship with her because I'm a mother now.
Right.
I have tried, and it just came to the point where as though, if I decide to have absolutely nothing to do with my father, then there's just not going to be a relationship, right? Because she's still married to him. She still has connections to him. And because of that, he will always know what I'm up to, my business, what's going on in my household. And it was just not going to work. She was even invited to my wedding, and she never showed up. But I took that as a sign that moving forward, this is what it needs to be. So we don't have any contact with each other.
And so let me ask you a deeper question about her. Do you feel at any time that she dealt with that her response to your trauma was in direct response to something that she had gone through and may not have had the words or the feelings to deal with that as well too?
Yeah, me and my sister, we spoke about this. We've been trying to make sense of all of this, even as adults. That is a possibility that may have happened to her, and she doesn't know how to deal with that trauma. But I just feel like just not wanting to have a relationship, like build a better relationship with your
Right.
kids, period, and choosing him over your own
Yeah.
children, like that's a whole nother can of worms.
Well, I will talk to you about how that affected your whole trajectory after that point, even as to how you formed your own relationships outside of family.
Yes.
But I want to ask you, Dominique. I know that your upbringing was a bit tumultuous as well.
Yes.
You had to deal with a parent that was dealing with substance abuse,
Yes.
and I want you to talk about how that affected your childhood.
Well, I didn't really have a childhood. When my mother was, using crack and things of that matter, at that time my father wasn't in the home, and it was kind of left on me to take
Okay.
care of my brother and sister. She would be out all hours of the night, and when she was home, she would sleep all day, and we pretty much just played outside or had to kind of fend for ourselves a lot of times. So, that in a lot of ways, it made me grow up and worry about things that I should not have
Absolutely.
to worry about as a child, And it carried on to other aspects as I, moved on into foster homes and things like that. So, I didn't really have that childhood from those ages of, probably you could remember at 3
Right.
up until about 7 or 8 years old until, people had to sit me down and say, hey, be a child.
Right.
Hey, go do these things that children do, and don't worry about adult things.
And so let's talk about foster care. So I want to talk about the incident that landed you in the foster care system because it was a very, very interesting thing for you. So I want you to describe exactly what happened that landed you into that position.
So my mother was gone,
Okay.
and it was just me, my brother, and my sister in our apartment at the time. They said they were hungry, they needed something to eat. We had nothing but pretty much wax, fruit, and
Wow.
things like that in the house. So I went outside to look for them. And according, I don't remember exactly what happened then, but reading the court records back then, a neighbor just saw me outside wandering around by myself, and they called the police. The police came, found out pretty much my mother wasn't in the home and things like that, and took us and put us into foster care.
So when this happened, what was going through your head when you're realizing you're taking me from a home that apparently I got used to because that's what because those are the conditions, and I'm not sure if they placed you and your siblings together. But what was that moment like when you were basically fetched away and put somewhere else?
Well, at the time it happened, in a way I understood it, which was a little weird because my mother wasn't there and they put me with someone where there's parents, there's some structure and things like that. I didn't rebel against it. At the time, they did separate me and my brother from my sister, and she went into a separate home and we went into another home. And even though the home was not the greatest home, I clung to it because it was a better home than the one I came from.
Okay.
So even if the conditions weren't that great, or we were probably a little more crowded in there than we should have been, for me, it was just, oh, my mom wasn't home at all.
Right.
So at least you're here.
Right.
So I'll cling to this for now.
And so having gone through all this at such a young age, was there ever a point where you just felt angry? Any bitterness, anything that was negative towards your development?
At the time, no. I didn't feel that at the time. That came later. And the reason it came later was being in school. And then teachers doing certain things, kind of like do a family tree.
Right.
And I couldn't do it. And I would feel very, very embarrassed and angry and upset because I didn't want to put down a lie, but I didn't have proper information either.
And so shifting back to you, so having suffered all that abuse and having it, and so it almost became a routine, kind of like something that you expected, probably.
Yes.
And as a young girl, how did you cope with that, knowing that it may happen again? What was your resolve? Like, how did you get through those moments?
Writing poetry was my everything, was my catharsis. It was the way because I needed an outlet, so
Absolutely.
that's how I expressed myself. Because I didn't have anyone in the home that was willing to like listen
Right.
and help me cope with the abuse. So I started writing at a really, really young age. Till this day, I'm still writing, and that's still the way that I cope with any types of stress or even with my trauma.
So I want to ask both of you this question. So I want to start with you. How do you feel that it affected the way A, that you saw the world, and B, how you viewed men in terms of what you thought that you had to deal with, or the things that you had to go through in order to have what you imagined to be a good relationship?
So for one, I saw the world as cold, of course, because my home was hell. So it's when you experience hell at home, it's really, really hard to see the world, in a positive light. I will say that in I don't want to say it's my first relationship, my first real relationship right out of high school. My high school sweetheart, when I first met him, he was actually the perpetrator in the abusive relationship that I endured for the first time. But while we were dating, didn't see the signs, didn't see any red flags that's who he were. But what really, really drew me in was for the fact that when I met his family for the first time, they accepted me.
Oh, okay.
They thought highly of me.
Yeah.
And his family is huge. And so when I met them for the first time and I see how, they gave their open arms to me, it just kind of like, because I've always wanted to be accepted, always yearned for that acceptance. So because they accepted me, that was why I think I endured the abuse for so long. It wasn't because of him. It wasn't the way he looked. It was not about him having money, what kind of car he drove. It was that he had a family who accepted me, and that to me, that was everything.
And so his family validated you in spaces where your family should have.
Exactly.
Because commonly, I was moved around a lot, but I had some validation in the family, so I didn't need that aspect. And so it's very interesting when we look at the way that we form adult relationships. It really is a mirror image of the relationships we did or didn't have growing up.
Yes.
And it's surprising that I've never heard that someone stayed because of the family acceptance, not because of the person, but because you didn't want to lose that validation.
Yeah, that was really, really a really big part of it for me as to why I stayed in that abusive relationship. But the relationship grew abusive over like a couple of years. It wasn't like immediate or anything. But
I was going to ask you that later.
But I endured it for that as long as I did because of the acceptance from his family.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what about you? How did your life experiences from up to that point help your view of the world? Well, help or harm your view of the world, and also how did it shape your first few relationships? I guess as a young man and as an adult.
Well, that is interesting because I didn't really get to interact with what a man was supposed to be or what a man does. So my first interactions with adults was mothers for the most part. So I had no idea just what to do until probably about my second foster home. There was a husband and wife. So having them to see their interaction as an example, it made me realize that, okay, I have to work in order to make things work. I have to put something into it. But also, too, because I never had anything, I worked. So when I got into my first few relationships, a lot of times there would be things that were red flags I would just ignore because I would say, I have to work. I have to put work into it. I have to work with them. I have to work on them until it carried into my first marriage. And within my first marriage, we were not great people for each other.
Okay.
And a lot of times there was things that she had done, and she pretty much was out doing her own thing and stuff like that. And I would just, because of my religion and because of seeing successful older marriages in my first foster home, I figured, okay, listen, I just got to tough it out and work through it. And it really broke me down going through all of that. And it was just something that I didn't realize how broken down I was until it was over.
And so you say broken down. What does that mean to you? Like,
not standing up for myself for a lot of things, a lot of times, and just also when things would just not be right, just making excuses for her. Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask you this question because this was and sometimes is an experience of mine.
Yeah.
Having been moved around a lot and having been shuffled, I used to feel that if I said too much or did too much, that would give reason for people to want to shuffle me again. So sometimes for me, I used to find myself not standing up for myself, not saying my piece because I didn't want to risk my stability.
Right.
Was there ever a point where you said, I don't want to do or say too much because I want to keep what I consider my stability?
Yes, and that was mostly in my foster homes because, like I said, not every foster home is an ideal situation.
Right.
So when kids would come, especially my first foster home, and they didn't really like my first foster mother, but because it was the only thing I had, whatever they said was wrong, and when they would talk to me, I say, no, everything's fine.
Right.
Everything's great. Everything's cool. Because I didn't have anything else to go back to.
Right. And considering what they took you from, it was
yes.
like, well, for me, my rock bottom was already hit.
Yes.
So now
exactly.
I see something that is a little above water. May not be the best version, but it's like, wow, this is better. This is the best thing I know.
Yes. And not even knowing that I just know it's the next thing that I don't have. I don't even know what the best thing could ever even be. So I'm accepting this because it's just, it can just be 1 centimeter over from whatever it is, and I'm clinging to it and I'm accepting. I'm like, nope, this is mine. This is what I'm going to deal with, and I'm going to work through it.
Coming up next on the bridge.
He started realizing, mom is hurt. Mom is not doing well because he started asking questions.
Yeah, a lot of times I felt like my anger would be used against me.
And why is that?
And because a lot of times just in relationships, when a man acts out, it becomes abuse. It becomes those things.
If you are a victim of sexual assault, please call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE. The call is confidential, and you will be routed to a local sexual assault service provider in your area. And so I want to ask you about your rock bottom in that relationship. When did you know that it was time to go?
So I knew that it was time to go when my son became older. He started realizing, mom is hurt. Mom is not doing well because he started asking questions like, Mom, are you okay? Also being an advocate for children of abuse. I knew that children who witness domestic violence, it is a form of child abuse. So with that being said, I'm like, well, with my advocacy and with my son, like, I have to make this move. Like, this cannot continue. And I knew that eventually, if I didn't leave, that I would, 1, lose my son, and 2, I may lose my life.
Now, were you ever worried that him seeing what was going on or witnessing at some point would ever make him responsible for doing that in the future? Like, was that ever a thought in your head?
Mm-hmm. Because I know that it will be a continued cycle of abuse.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that leaving a situation like that is not always easy.
No. But one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. Yeah. Because
it's hard because you have to leave the routine and you have to leave safely. So what was your exit plan? So what was that like for you?
It's funny because it's like mentally, like women who are in an abusive relationship, it's like we mentally leave the person already. We're probably like physically there.
Right.
You have to like really mentally prepare yourself before you even leave. You can't just get up and say, well, I'm just going to leave. But for me, it was the public setting that, he was so comfortable, talking down to me, yelling at me. Oh, you better look me in my eye when I talk to you, and things of that nature. Then he even slapped me in front of his mom one time. That was just...
What did his mom do, if anything?
What did she do? She cried. Yeah, she cried. She cried.
But did she ever say to him that was not right?
Yeah, she has. But like I said, it was... I'm sorry. I'm trying not to get emotional, but
No, it's okay. It's okay because
yeah,
it's your truth.
she cried, and I'm like, well, if she can react that way by seeing it for the first time, how, my son may have felt, and I don't want it to be something that he's immune to,
Absolutely.
and think that it's normal to happen. But when he started to get comfortable about talking down to me, or there's been times that I think it was that same day that I actually decided to leave, was when he picked his mama from work, and he was driving on the highway, and he told me to get out the car. He was like, "Get out the car! Like get the hell out the car!" And my mother-in-law, his mom was actually in the front seat and said, "I cannot have you just leave her out here on the highway like that." Like, that's when I knew that this is just becoming a cycle. It's just going to get worse. It's not going to get
and
better.
Escalating, right?
Yeah. And yeah, so that's when I knew it was that particular day that I contacted my big sister, and I told her, because I knew that the only way that I would just leave this relationship for good and there's no going back is if I were to contact my sister and tell her what was going on. And when I contacted her, she had a plan. She said, "I need you to contact the police. I need you to, if I call you and you don't pick up your phone, then I know that you're in danger, or I know you're in trouble."
Right.
And that's what happened.
And I'm glad you said that, because you had an exit plan, and
Yeah.
I know that you do the advocacy for this as well.
Yeah.
How important is it for victim, male or female, to have a safe exit plan?
How important it
Yeah.
is. I think it's very important, but it's also important to have a support system, because if you don't have a support system, it's a hard decision to make, and that's what happened to me. My sister lived all the way in Florida, so it's not like I can just go stay at my sister's house overnight. Then all I knew was his family. So it was kind of like, how do I tell them that this is happening to me? You know what I'm saying? So I just kind of felt alone in the process. Then not having the parental support by neither my mother and father.
And of course, maybe worse, the family that validated you, a member of that saw it happening and couldn't do anything about it. Seemingly couldn't do anything about it.
And that's the thing. I was also ashamed. Like, how would they view me? How would they see our relationship? Because even though I was going through that abusive relationship behind closed doors, I always pretended that we were good on the outside. Yeah. So that's why I said it didn't really become a big deal to me until it started happening in like the public settings, which was like, okay, enough is enough. Yeah. And then with my son, he's getting older. He started to understand what's going on. This is just not the life that I would want for my kids.
Absolutely.
So that made the decision a lot easier, but it was still one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make in my life.
So I know that you were married, and for all accounts, it wasn't a good marriage?
No, it wasn't.
Because she spoke of her hardest choice to make. What was your hardest choice in that marriage as well?
Was filing the divorce papers.
So what did filing divorce mean to you in that version of that relationship for you?
That I've done everything that I've could, that, the other person didn't want to do the work, and that it was just time to try to move on,
But did you ever have a sense that it felt like a failure, that the image that you thought that you were supposed to have as a man at that time, that you failed?
In a way, yes. In a way, no. Because when I've exhausted every option that I could have exhausted individually, the failure came in just, I couldn't convince that person to want to fight. And that was something I had to learn too, that I can't convince anybody else to do something they don't want to do. I can't expect them to want the same things that I want, even if seemingly on the surface it looks that way. But, because all the things, we would say, okay, if we ever had a problem, we would go to marriage counseling, we would talk to our pastors, we would do these things. And as soon as I implemented those plans that we discussed, she went left. And it's kind of like, okay, we both said this is what we're going to do. Right. So it turned from me doing the things that I thought were the right things to do, which, at the time, I'm like, what do you mean this is not the right thing? To her saying, oh, you're trying to embarrass me. You're trying to tell everybody our business. You're trying to, manipulate things a certain way. And of course, I would then kind of hold back, because I'm like, okay, I don't want anybody to have a negative image of you. I always say all the time, oh, I don't want to talk bad about her, because, even now, it's kind of, I don't want to present her in a negative image because it's still protecting her in a way. But, for me, that's why I shift the focus to just me, because when I say, okay, I did everything I was supposed to do, or seemingly that the things that I was taught, within my religion and within seeing those older relationships and hearing, okay, we went through all these things, this is how we got here. And you think, okay, yeah, I can deal with the bumps in the road too. But there's a difference between bumps and red flags, no go, this is supposed to stop right now.
But I want to ask you something, because I've known you for some time, and
Yes.
you've always had a docile attitude. And I asked you during the break, I'm like, do you ever get mad? Like, is there ever a point where you may have gotten angry and upset, but you just didn't know how, or felt it was unsafe for you to express it in the way that average people do that?
Yeah. A lot of times I felt like my anger would be used against me.
And why is that?
And because a lot of times, just in relationships, when a man acts out, it becomes abuse. It becomes those things. And I didn't want it to look that way at all. So I would be angry, but then I would have to hold it in.
And so what in your life gave you the impression that you expressing your anger in your own way, outside of what you think men can or can't do, for you specifically, what gave you the impression that you had to stifle your emotional expression in order to save face or to save the situation?
Just in general, just seeing relationships where most of the time, the man is the abuser. So, and being in that type of situation, a lot of times, it's very hard for, if a man is abused, to come forth and say, I was abused. These things happened to me, and for people to take them seriously and believe them. But if we get into a heated argument, and if I punch the wall, all of a sudden it's, oh, he's a monster, he's abusive, he's all those things, and it will go that way. And I just had to keep in mind to keep my emotions in check, so I don't become that type of person, or I don't go down that road. And so just take the path that we discussed previously to try to reconcile these things. And when that didn't happen, that did make me upset, angry, and confused, because I didn't know what to do.
But you didn't express it, though.
I,
And the point I'm getting into,
Yes.
because see, for me, I had this strong feeling being a parent. I fought so hard to try not to be my dad.
Yeah.
The version of my dad that he was to me, that I was more concerned about not being him as opposed to being the father I was supposed to be. And so, with that being said, do you feel that you stifling your emotions made you seem like a pushover, because people tend to regulate how they treat you by how you show your emotions?
Yes.
So do you feel that at some point, because you were so focused on the interpretation of what you thought anger was, that people took that as a way to take advantage of you in situations?
I felt like she used that to take advantage of the situation a lot of times, because I wouldn't speak up or say anything. A lot of times the things that were said from her were taken as hard, as golden, and I wouldn't say much because, I was still trying to not paint her in a negative light, So, a lot of times I would, if I would deal with friends and things of that matter, they would ask, kind of like, these are things I said, and I'm saying, well, no, but then I wouldn't go into it. I wouldn't go into detail very much, and I wouldn't fight those things all the time. Even within our separation, pretty much all of our friends, I was alone.
Well,
And
I'm not sure where you are with that concept, but I will say this. You never have to talk bad about somebody if you're telling the truth. So if you're telling a situation where this is the facts of what happened, anyone hearing it will render their own opinion. So talking bad is being purposely malicious with the intent of changing someone's view of somebody.
Yes.
But if you and I got into a fight and you hit me in the face, and I tell someone you hit me in the face, that's a fact. Now, whatever they garner from that, especially if I tell them the reasons that's happened, that's on their own.
Yes.
So and I've been there before, where I was so staunch on, let me make sure I'm the nice guy. Let me make sure that I don't ruffle the feathers, and realize that people are going to think what they want to think anyway. And while I'm working to protect you, the person I'm protecting may not give me the same consideration because they're going to tell the truth of what I did and let people gather their own opinion anyway.
Yes.
So I wonder if that's the part of you that has changed between that marriage that you had then and and the relationship that you have now.
Yes, honestly, I learned that piece of, just learned that lesson going on, where when I started speaking up and I started saying these things, that people was like, oh, okay, now this makes sense, and those things. So now with my relationship that I have now, I'm able to be more open. I'm able to be more honest. It's more of a safe space where I don't feel like anything I say will be used against me or flipped or used in a way to make it seem like I'm doing something negative when I'm not. Right. Just for that person's advantage. Yeah. So I do feel like, okay, yes, I can say exactly how I feel.
Well, and the purpose of me drawing that out was to show that our traumas, or the things that have influenced the way that we see the world, show up in our relationships in small ways until those small things become big, and then those big things are the rock bottom that falls out. And we realize after, it's like I operated in a way that was a true deficiency to who I should have been. And if we recognize that in time, then we can do our work, and the next time around we may even just be slightly better than the last time, but at least we're getting better. Coming up next on The Bridge.
My struggle is with, now that I am a mother of two, it just becomes more of a struggle as I get older, because it's like, how can my mother not want to protect me?
If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 to speak to a trained advocate regarding information and resources. The call is confidential. And so for this point, I want to talk about one of the most important aspects of healing, and that's forgiveness. Because I know that you had a situation where your mother was a drug addict, and it caused the cycle of events. And your whole life is a whole event that you have to think about. How do I move forward? So I want to ask both of you, starting with you, Dominique. Do you feel that part of your growth and part of your healing, if any, had to do with the fact that you had to somehow forgive those you felt responsible for putting you in a place that all of this happened for you?
Yes. I had to forgive, because if I didn't forgive, I saw what it did to others. With me being introduced to church, and with me being able to kind of get the tools to figure out how to forgive, and being around other foster kids and seeing the way that they resented their parents and the way they were angry about situations where they would leave the foster home to go back to their parents, and their parents aren't the people they expected them to be or wanted them to be. And seeing that enough times deterred me from wanting that. It was kind of, okay, I'm going to be here, but I have to forgive her for the things that she could not do for me, where it finally led to last year I was able to finally meet my mother.
Wow.
And when I met her, it was one of those things where I realized out of all of my siblings, I was the only one who was willing to meet her with no expectations. No, I just want to meet you for who you are. No expectations of you being my mother, a grandmother, I just want to know who you are. And if this grows, great. And the other side of it is, if it doesn't grow, it's like, am I going to be okay with that?
Right.
And that's the part I'm still processing now for me, because, by myself, I'll kind of say, okay, but then someone say, hey, how's everything going with your mom?
Right.
And then I have to say, we haven't spoken. We haven't talked to each other.
You have to speak the truth out of it.
You have to speak the truth.
And
yes.
then when you speak it, it affects you, because
Yes.
it's coming out of your body.
Yes.
But also, and because it was addiction, did you have to come to a resolve of understanding the power of addiction and that it is a disease in order to separate her at some point from the disease?
Yes. And with that, the one thing that I can say is that within school, when we started to learn about in health class of drugs and things like that, it it gave me the doorway to go through and start researching more and looking into those things. And once I understood that it was out of her control, it was easier to say, okay, that she couldn't be a mom.
Yeah.
How can she be? If, the things that she was relying on, help her get through, because I realized she had trauma.
Absolutely.
And once I realized her trauma was with, my father being murdered and those things, and she went on a spiral, it was kind of like,
and that is the perfect reason why thoughtful communication is so important. And in, and in terms of being able to communicate your trauma.
yes.
My aunt, whom I love dearly like a mother, she became a drug addict too, and I was 14. That was probably the roughest year of my childhood, seeing her spiral down. But when I was able to see that the addiction was a disease, I separated that disease part. But then I always asked the question, what made you take the first hit? And I realized, looking back at her life, that it was about things unhealed, things unsaid, and that was a coping mechanism. I want to ask you, Fran, I know that you struggle with forgiveness, and I think that it's a timing thing. Everybody's time frame of forgiveness and how they do that, is up to them. What is the hardest part of forgiveness that you feel is your biggest struggle, though?
So forgiveness is a part of the healing process, and I'm still healing.
Yeah.
But my struggle is with, now that I am a mother of two. It just becomes more of a struggle as I get older, because it's like, how can my mother not want to protect me?
I see. So you're seeing things. So are you saying that your mother is the person that is the hardest for you to forgive?
Yes.
Because you're in the position, and like me being a dad now to my sons, I would often say, I don't know how I could not be a dad to my sons. I don't know how I would not be there. So I can see how, in being in the role, you see what could have been done for you, right? And so that makes it hard. It's like, because now you have to put yourself in her shoes.
Exactly.
And that's the hardest if you don't have the same mindset.
Exactly.
And so what do you feel has to happen for you in order to reach that place?
I think I'm getting there, and the reason why I'm getting there is because I'm starting to understand that my purpose in life is to advocate for children of abuse, and that I wouldn't probably be in the place I am now advocating for children if I didn't endure that pain. Because I know that with pain, then there's that passion that it stems from, and then there's that purpose. So me being in alignment with my purpose, I had to go through that pain. And that's just how I try to make sense of it, is that even though I have both parents that are not in my life or supportive, my mom being the narcissist because she's the enabler of the abuse, and my dad being a pedophile, there's something that I'm supposed to do with that, like not just sit on it, like advocate for children. That's where your passion is going to come from. And so I try to make sense of that. And
it must be hard to have, when you think of your mom, narcissist, your dad, pedophile, those are not titles that the average kid would put on their parents, because we have a hard enough time saying mom and dad. You have to associate them with titles that are completely negative for you. Was there ever a time that you felt embarrassed by your family?
Yes, I do. I feel like the more that I share my story, the more that I become comfortable with sharing that part of me. But growing up, it was definitely something I didn't want to share. It was just so much shame associated with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and so interestingly enough, you took your coping mechanism and turned it into a passion, which is your writing, and you infuse your passion and your purpose with your first book of poetry called Break the Silence and Bloom.
Yes.
So I know that writing has had to be a bit of therapy for you.
Yes.
But what do you hope the reader gets from this volume?
That there is the other side of abuse. And with this book, I write it to inspire victims and of childhood abuse, and hopefully they can get some inspirations from my book of poetry. Like I said, I've been writing since I was about 12, and if it wasn't for this, I don't think I would be here, because that was my way of coping until today. Break the Silence and Bloom is not just the title of my book. It is an initiative that I am working on now. Our mission is to create community initiatives around child abuse prevention, and to provide safe spaces for those affected by the abuse. And also, I also have another project that I just wrapped up. It's my first children's book. It's called Tiara Talks About Touches. And it's just to help normalize conversation around good touch and bad touch and respect and boundaries.
I started writing at 7. And I started telling people, as an adult, I started writing because I could write the world that I wanted to be in.
Yes.
I could write the feelings that I probably couldn't share with my family because we had dark secrets and I wasn't equipped. That's not how we were raised in my family. We take things down to the grave, but we affect everyone along the way.
Yep.
That's what it was for me. And if I didn't have my writing, I don't know where I would be. And then my writing became a part of my life work. So I understand how you can turn your pain into passion and purpose.
Yes.
So there's a certain poem that I want you to, that I was thumbing through it during the break, and I landed on page 4. The poem is called "I Feel Free." So would you mind reading this for us, please?
Sure. So yeah, this piece is called "I Feel Free." I feel free. I feel free because I transform my pain into passion. I'm no longer saddened because no pain is everlasting. I feel free because I was able to let go of all of those feelings. Fear, shame, guilt, and anger. All wounds are meant for healing. I feel free because I can look back fearlessly and smile. I knew I would survive once I freed my inner child. I feel free because finally the cycle has ended.
Thank you so much. So what I got from this poem is that the freedom is letting your inner child start to grow up.
Yes.
But I want to talk to you, Dominic, because at any given day in the U.S., we have over 440,000 children in foster care. Sometimes we have a grim image of foster care. But for you, your first foster home, you found God. You were put in church.
Yes.
So I want you to tell us how did that affect your whole trajectory after that point?
When I was introduced to church, introduced to God in my first foster home, it gave me a different view of the world that let me understood that I didn't have to be the way that the world is when it comes to approaching different situations or the way that life happens to me.
Right.
I can respond differently. Every foster home I had been in, after that first one, became more and more involved in church. Okay. I ended up having parents that were deacons and Sunday school teachers, and to the point where even in my last foster home, pretty much the pastor was our cousin, and it was a family church. So being in that helped me just focus on what can I do now that I've gotten to this point in order to help others, and be able to be an example pretty much of, hey, this did happen to me, but you can overcome it, and you can be able to look at someone else and give them encouragement in order to keep going as well. And with, understanding too that it gave me structure and it gave me an answer. So anytime that I didn't know where to go or I didn't understand something, I could just go to God and it would be provided for me.
Awesome. So if you could speak to that child who was a victim of addiction through their parent or their caregiver, and that is still struggling with the acceptance of it because some children and adults take it personal, but they take the whole cycle personal. What advice would you give them in order to help them unlock that grief and that pain and that anger?
I would tell them to be honest with how they feel, and then also to just understand that you have a lot of life ahead of you in order to change, in order to finally get control of your situation and be able to make the decision to change and be able to say, okay, I don't have to accept things the way that they are.
Right.
I can choose a path that's different than the one that was presumably set before me. Because a lot of times, like what you say with those foster kids, we have other numbers that just with my demographic that we're not going to make it. We're not going to achieve things. We're not going to be successful in life. And just being able to understand that those odds are against you, being able to take advantage of opportunities when they come along and just doing great in every opportunity that comes along and taking advantage of it will lead you to better things and will lead you to a better life. And you don't have to be you know, in the same path that people before you were.
Absolutely. Now, your story is so complex. I would ask you what to say to the person who is going through domestic violence or is finally walking away, male or female. But then I want to also ask you, what would you say to the young person or the adult that is still dealing with the ramifications of childhood sexual assault? What advice would you give to either group of people that are still struggling with those things?
My advice would be to share your truth and your testimony. That is the only way that you'll be able to grow from it. You have to break the silence. Like, there's no other way around it. You have to speak to a therapist, speak to a family member about what took place. That was how I was able to walk out of the abusive relationship by contacting my sister.
Right.
You know, like, you have to share it. I mean, if not, it's just gonna be something that's going to be internalized, and
it's going to
fester, and it's just not going to get any better. So definitely share your truth and own it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and the good thing is you mentioned therapy. You know, oftentimes that's not part of the African American experience because of our long held, mistrust of certain things. How hard was it for you to start therapy? And then once you started, how soon did you start to understand the benefits of it?
I started therapy recently. Yeah, like I said, writing has helped me cope. But with therapy comes medication to help with my anxiety disorders and depression, which was like a temporary fix.
Right.
But it's been about a year and a couple months since I've tapered off my medication and been doing extremely well.
That's good.
But to continue the therapy is what is the best for me. But yeah, the medication didn't really help me at first. But I just think that what would help me in the future is just getting answers from my mother. Like, I still feel like that's just a struggle that I'm still dealing with. Like, why she never did anything to protect me, or, and I think, like I said, I struggle with that more so because I'm a mother now.
Yeah. And so thank you so much for joining me on The Bridge. And I wish you guys the absolute best as you continue to positively affect the world, one person and one day at a time.